much for joining me, Tom, and very excited to have a discussion with you. And I'd really like to get into talking to you about a food writer, being a journalist, and some of the current situation with information that the consumer is receiving and where you see things possibly going in the future. But first of all, I'd just like to sort of ask a very open-ended question regarding regenerative agriculture. How much do you think people understand about it currently, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I think obviously that regenerative agriculture is an incredibly important movement, if not the most important movement. I think people on the whole are beginning to realize the horrors of intensive farming, the short-term profit, but the long-term devastation that the continued cycle of pesticides and fertilizers and the leaching of nutrients from the soil, it all comes back to the soil. We have to look after the soil. The soil is a healthy soil is a healthy everything. So in terms of how it's perceived, I think there is a slight problem I find at the moment as a consumer, as a food writer, journalist, and the rest of it, of too many labels. You have, I mean, it's not just the official labels, the free range, the organic, the biodynamic, it's the other labels, the red tractor, and then all those words like sort of farm fresh and traditionally made. And, you know, it's all quite opaque, isn't it? Obviously with organic, there are certain standards. But then again, I do have a problem with people saying, oh, organic ketchup's better than normal ketchup, or meat is better because it's organic. Well, I know lots of farmers who refuse to jump through the hoops of organic to be certified, but yet they farm to a far higher level than perhaps the Soil Association or the Organic Growers Association decree. So I think clarity is key, you know, and going back to that, where our food comes from. So these are the two most important things. And I feel that butchers like you are incredibly important in getting the message across. You're totally transparent and you know exactly, you know, the information, whether it's your soy-free chicken or whatever it is, you know where your food's coming from. And I think we have to get back to that, know where your food comes from.
So possibly strip out a lot of these box ticking type of certifications. And do you think then the future for brands is, and the future for consumers is, simply to ask questions and have a more transparent food chain, if you like? But the difficulty there is I think that's potentially open to abuse in a way that a certification isn't.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel, I mean, you look at the supermarkets now, there's no point saying all supermarkets are bad and all butchers are brilliant. But I try to, on the whole, like many other people who like eating good food. For me, the butcher is everything. The relationship with the butcher is everything. Any good butcher will be happy to tell you, the punter, where the meat comes from without the need of labels. But I admit that you know, I go to the supermarket sometimes and buy some things, you know, that. But again, going back to that, the supermarkets will use things like, you know, Farm Fresh or Oakham Farm, you know, and as again and again, as it's been shown that, you know, these nice bucolic sounding farms are not, you know, they're nothing like that. And there's not even real farm. Yeah, exactly. It's a brand. So you're quite right about not the cynicism, but the way that supermarkets will use nostalgia, will use nice words and images. And again, going back to the bucolic ideal of happy cows and happy sheep and all the rest of it to sell their food, when the truth might be a little bit different. Take, for example, free range.
The most abused term in food, I think.
Exactly. And I remember there was a great, he died very sadly a few years ago, called Reg Johnson at Goosener Chickens up in Goosener in Lancashire. And he said, look, my chickens, you know, he does the most amazing chickens and geese and ducks. And he says, look, I'm not free range because my chickens can come inside and outside as they want. He's very happy to show everyone the size of the sheds and the food. But he says, I'm not, you know, he refused to say, you know, these are free range, officially free range. I do it my way. He said a farmer can put their chicken house on a hill facing north, so the wind's coming in and the chickens won't go out, but still it's officially free range because it's the criteria of the size that each chicken has. So I mean, I really do think that it goes back to education without finger wagging, without being patronizing. It's really just about saying, look, this is, you know, again, taking it back to beef, for example. People say, oh, it's rare breed beef, fantastic. Well, that means nothing, rare breed. As you well know, it means that, you know, you have to feed it right, you have to, you know, the beast right. It's a huge collection of things to make a really good bit of beef, whether it's finishing or the butchering or the hanging. All these different parts come together to make it. It's not just Belted Galloway is amazing. You have to do every single stage right and do it. And I think people simplify farming far too much, and it's all about, again, going back to the labels. When I go to the butcher and buy a steak, sometimes you'll find out what breed it is, but I trust, I mean, HC Water I use because they're local to me, but they're great. They just say, they tell you everything you want to know about it. But the main thing they say is, this is a really good bit of beef and it is ethically sourced, and we can tell you exactly where it comes from what herd, from what farm, if you ask. And I think it's back to that, is transparency. Know where our food comes from.
And that gets really difficult when things scale up, though. And there's a couple of things as you were talking there that I thought I probably shouldn't disclose this, but some of our farmers who are doing then maybe not certified organic, but they're farming in an organic way, they're definitely regenerative, and they've been measured regenerative, and they're doing rare breed. They're 100% pasture feeding their beef. What we don't buy often ends up in the supermarket chain. So they end up selling to Morrisons and Waitrose, and if you are really lucky, you can get, but you don't know what's what, and the supermarkets aren't differentiating because the beef often is being sold into the commodity market for the commodity prices. So it's going up against grain finished, shed finished, you know, fast growing breeds, but it's of an extraordinarily different quality if you're lucky.
And another thing I find, which is really important, we talk about, you know, eating good meat and eating, you know, whether it's sustainably farmed and all the rest of it. But what we tend to forget is the vast majority of meat eaten in this country goes into the sort of the schools, the hospitals, the catering sector. It's the faceless, tasteless. That's where cheap meat really goes. Now, it's all very well going to Tesco and seeing the economy chicken breasts for, you know, a whole chicken for £4, and you think, oh, that's not going to be a very good chicken, which obviously it isn't, because it's been raised for profit, not for flavor. It's, you know, it's fast growing with the huge breast and the, you know, spindly legs, and, you know, often in horrible and squalid conditions. But at least in the supermarket, you can see that and you can make the choice. Whereas when, you know, if you're looking at the vast majority of food in this country, the cheap food, it's not in the nice restaurants. It's not in the London restaurants or the Brighton restaurants or the Edinburgh restaurants. It is, you know, the mass catering market. And that, I think, to really make a difference, we have to start looking at the meat that goes into there, and to realize that, you know, it's all very well for me sort of sat here as a food writer, you know, wagging my finger saying, eat better meat. You know, we've got to change the way we think about meat. Meat is, it's something it is a luxury to an extent. I think that, you know, it's too easy to say, you know, eat less meat, but eat better. I do believe in that, but it's not for the likes of me to start saying that. It's like, for example, I mean, McDonald's in a different way. McDonald's, yeah, their hamburgers, they're not very good for you. But on the other hand, when they change to organic milk, they make a bigger difference for farmers doing that than perhaps, you know, so I think, you know, it's to be, everyone wants black and white, and it's all shades of gray. There is no black and white. Now, we know that actually pasture-fed, proper pasture-fed cattle actually locks carbon back into the soil. This is actually regenerative, and it is carbon, whatever it is, neutral.
Negative.
This idea that cows create methane and global warming. Well, yes, if you're talking about the monster feedlots in America and the huge swathes of South America that, you know, rainforests are being cut down to feed it, but not. This is British pasture-fed cattle is one of the most sustainable forms of farming in the world. It is a fantastic thing, and it just annoys me when certain of the more fanatical vegan, perhaps, or vegetarians start throwing these figures willy-nilly about without, you know, just using it as ammunition. It's not true. But again, it's all about nuance. It's all about, you know,
shades of grey.
Yeah,
shades of grey. No, I couldn't agree more. And in actual fact, we're in our third year of talking about this campaign we call Regenuary. And I must admit, I started the campaign through pure anger at Veganuary. And it was when I saw KFC doing a Veganuary burger that it just got under my skin from both ends. I was angry with KFC and I was angry with Veganuary for, I thought it was greenwashing on both ends. So my original post that had 1 million impressions and went crazy and started the whole thing was written angrily after a big glass of red wine and typed at night. But now I really, third year in, I'm trying to include plant-based foods into Regenuary. I want people, because as omnivores, we eat plants as well. We eat mostly plants, and everything needs to be integrated. And the conclusion I've come to through the research I've been doing is that you can't grow regenerative plants unless you are also keeping animals well, because animals and plants are completely interlinked. And you made a very, very good point there that in the UK, I believe the most ethical protein we can produce is from grazing herbivores, large grazing herbivores. It's absolutely essential. I do feel that we are fighting an information war and that the nuance is super important, but I believe everything is driven by consumer behavior. So how do you think we can, people like simplified messages, but simplified messages don't produce results. How do you think as a journalist, you can start sort of getting people to ask better questions?
I think, well, you know, as journalists, we have a voice. We have hopefully readers.
I'm putting a big responsibility on you there.
No, and I feel very much it is the writer's responsibility. I just say I act as a mouthpiece. I'm not doing the hard work. I'm not farming. I'm not butchering. I'm not doing anything. I'm just taking, whether it's you know, you guys or any farm, and just sort of, you know, amplifying it to the readers. But how do you change? I think we are changing. I think slowly, you know, people are beginning to realize the importance of you know, of knowing where your food comes from. But again, it goes back to that thing that for example, you know, you'll see KFC and McDonald's and Beyond Meat doing all these vegan products. Now, they are as processed, if not more processed, than the very worst fast food you ever find. There are proteins and lots of salt, and it's all, you know, all sorts of strange things in there. And that for me is saying, you know, plant-based is good and animal-based is bad is just maddening.
Somebody I interviewed a few days ago brilliantly described, they said, when you're biting into the Beyond Burger, what you're eating is essentially intellectual property.
Yeah, I mean,
you're biting into patents. There are 12 patents on the Beyond Burger. That's what you're eating. That's the value of it, is the intellectual property and patents.
And you know, these the vegan, you know, I very much the belief of, I have absolutely no problem, you know, obviously you do what you want. If you want to be vegan, full respect to doing that, you know, I'm a vegetarian, whatever it is. But what I don't like is this skewed narrative that there is no taking into account, like you say, the, you know, of sustainable farming. I mean, for example, I was up in Scotland the other day, and there's this amazing farm called Wildfarming. It's up in the Cairngorms, and the most amazing lady called Laurel Foreman. Now, she started farming there 10, 11 years ago. She does belted Galloways, she does Manx lambs, and you know, it is. And what she's basically doing is, she says, look, I'm doing this because I love farming. But I mean, the mutton is just out of the world. So all her produce is amazing. But what she has done, it used to be a conventional farm, and over 10 to 15 years, I think she's had it, she's transformed it into fully organic. But she's also bringing back the natural wetlands. She's bringing back curlews. She's doing nature corridors. She's doing all those things that it's not just go organic. It's pulling it all together so she said, this doesn't make me any money. I should be, you know, if I was doing it intensively, I'd be farming every single inch. And I certainly would not in the middle, because it's a bowl, her farm, and the wetlands, I would not be, you know, giving a bit, there's no crops there at all. It's useless. But she said the point of her view of farming is it's regenerative. It should be about putting life back into the soil. And the brilliance she has, for example, she never uses pest. I mean, she never uses wormers or anything like that. So she'll be moving the cattle and the sheep onto different fields. So of course, the bugs that, you know, the worms and stuff in them, you know, they're eating it, and then it's just, you know, because they're a sheep. Worms, and there are cow worms, and so it's all done naturally. It's incredibly hard work, but she says it's not just about, you know, the finished product is amazing, but her philosophy of farming is, you know, I'm here to bring life back to the soil
and leave the land better.
And that just, you think people like her and many farmers, many of your farmers as well, that for me, you think that's what farming is about. That is the future. That is the only way we have any future in farming.
Or at all, actually.
Or at all, exactly. Because, you know, as you well know, the endless cycle of pesticides and fertilizers, it just strips the soil of its natural nutrients. And it just, you know, you end up with arid desert-like conditions where nothing can grow on it. And I just feel that it's not just the likes of us and all the other people we've been talking to saying this is important. This is so important, regenerative farming, for the future of, I mean, humanity, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think in the UK, we're quite lucky. And since the whole balls up of Brexit and the rest of it, I felt that the EU were pretty good, actually, you know, of animal welfare. I like the standards that they, you know, there are many issues, but on the whole,
a lot of them came from the UK, though, right? A lot of the good standards for food within the EU that we were having to adhere to were actually British designed in the first place, as I understand it.
Yeah, and I think our animal welfare standards are some of the highest in the world, and that's why I worry, not in some awful xenophobic, jingoistic way about imports coming in, but you look at what they're doing at the moment. Have the government having promised that British farming be protected? Absolute bollocks. I mean, you know, it's looking at deals, and it's basically money over any sort of.
Well, they approved that insecticide this week, which they said they never would, and yeah.
It's just, you know, and Australia, listen, I love Australia, but Australia has a very different farming, you know, in their intensive farming, and certainly in some of the cattle and stuff, they have different regulations. It's a much lower bar that what you can do in Australia and parts of America, or North America, is, you know, our standards are so high. So, you know, this is a genuine threat. It's not, you know, protectionism at all, but it's basically bringing in meat that our farmers wouldn't be allowed to produce because of the standards, and it sort of creates a whole, you know, it's all right at the very top end, and the sort of meat, you know, the levels that you're selling, that is the very best, and it's expensive, I know, but I'm talking about this flood of cheap meat coming into the food system, and at levels that wouldn't be allowed by our laws anyway. And it worries me, because the government, or actually government, to be honest, Labour, Conservative, there hasn't been a decent farming for ages. They don't think about regenerative. They sort of occasionally do something. Oh, you know, we're very green and we care, but it doesn't seem they have a proper strategy to think about the future, about the next 50 years. And it's down to the likes of you guys, and whether it's Helen Browning or Patrick Holdens, you know, carry on, you know, beating the drum and say, look, this isn't just about posh, expensive meat. This is so much more. This is,
yeah, it needs to scale up to become more affordable. And I think there's a couple of things he said in there which really struck me, is that rather than making the top better, we need to make the bottom better of the pyramid. Yeah. You know, we need to bring up the standards and try and end factory farming. It's all very well the sort of very high quality producers that we're talking to, who are sort of on a model of continuous improvement and doing this regeneration, but to make a change across the, you know, 65 million people in the UK, it's the bottom that needs to lift, not the top. And this has brought me round to something you said a few minutes ago that I want to kind of drop back to. I think a lot of consumers, yourself, myself, you know, when we go to butchers, we talk to people and we ask them where the meat came from. And yet when you sit down at a chair in a restaurant, you tend not to.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that the vast majority of mass-produced meat is ending up in catering. But I've been quite surprised coming into this business as an outsider, how much quite high-end, quite decent restaurants, maybe not the best of the best, but really quite expensive restaurants, are using what I would call commodity meats, but they're just very good at cooking. And I see a conflict there. I see a conflict that a consumer would go and buy their meat at Ginger Pig or from us or other places, but they go to a restaurant and they stop asking questions.
Yeah.
And how I mean, you are very connected to the restaurant world and you understand how that works. How can we get restaurants, or do we need to get the consumer? I know a few people actually who will email a restaurant before they go and eat there and ask them where they source their meat before they decide whether they're going to order the vegetarian dish or not. But do you think that's something that people should be doing, people who care?
Yes, I think it's really interesting, because at the one extreme, you have a menu that literally tells you what pasture, you know, the cow was fed, and that for me is too much. I'm very much of the sort of school of thought, of the sort of Fergus Henderson school of thought, in that you come to my restaurant The pork that we have tastes nice. Therefore, you just come and eat with us, and
it's been really well
care about the flavor.
Yeah.
Meat, especially chicken. Well, chicken, pigs. The animals that are the most easily intensely farmed, chickens and pigs. They good meat that tastes nice. 99% of the time would have been sustainably farmed. You don't, cheap chicken and cheap pork doesn't taste of much, really. There's no fat, there's no depth, there's no nothing. And so with the really good restaurants, you go to, whether it's St. John or any of your favorites, the River Cafe, they're always, you'll just trust them because they're doing a pork chop and that pork chop will taste amazing.
It's more the level down from that.
Yes,
because I know that those guys are, they're sourcing correctly and they have direct relationships with farmers for everything. But it's more just the sort of, maybe not the £100 a head, but the £50 a head restaurants that often, I've been quite surprised to see named restaurants and hotels who are buying from Smithfield Market, and they're going, what's the price of X? They're not really focused on the provenance. It's more, it's more cost, and it's more just my thought was around, as a consumer, people will tend to put the blinkers on when they're eating out compared to eating at home.
And I do find, Smithfield, I think there you can get good produce from Smithfield.
You can,
not to do it down, but yes, and you find that people are going to the Ginger Pig or going to HE Water, going to you and buying this. But then, so how do you do it in restaurants? Well, the problem is what the restaurateurs will say is, well, we've got to be competitive, and we can't charge. Our punters won't pay X for whatever it is. And it doesn't matter if it's a curry house or a Thai restaurant or a cafe, it's regardless of the type of food. When you go for a curry, sometimes the chicken's not very good quality. Same with going to a cafe and the sausages aren't very good quality. But then you think, well, it's only £8, so how could they put that into the price?
Yeah, sure.
But how do we change that? It's again that thing of, the power, punter power, I suppose.
Right.
But I think there will always be people who say, well, we want to eat meat, but we want it to be under £5. Now, that if you're going to have a £5 steak, or maybe a £2 steak, that's not going to be much. But again, on the other hand, to buy shin or to buy breast of lamb those are affordable. And it's going back to the cheaper cuts, the slower, you can build that into your pricing, I think, with the stews and the braisers, all those tough cuts that have done all that work during life, and you slow cook them and they all break down and they're wonderful. The problem is we're a country obsessed with prime cuts. We love chicken breast, we want sirloin steak, we want lamb cutlets. So, and everyone seems to forget, only too well, is that's cows aren't made up of sirloin.
Carcass balance is an incredibly difficult thing to have that discussion with the restaurant.
And what I like about the ethical butcher is the oxtails, the offal, all those things. But again, it's going back to changing the way we eat, because chicken breast, we don't like the smelly bits, the wobbly bits. We have this childhood fear of, I suppose a lot of people have offal because we've been put off as children at school eating sort of hot tough liver with the tubes in it, and whether it's and kidneys that smell of pee, and for obviously for us I love offal. I absolutely can't get enough of it. And again, on different cultures, you look at Chinese or Thai or
even France,
everything Eastern European. Exactly, offal is a treat because it's. I always find, especially in Chinese, whether it's Szechuan or Cantonese or whatever it is, it's just as much about texture as it is about flavor, and that's very much part of the culture, and that for me is magnificent. But in this country and in America especially, they're called variety meats in America, which if there's a more unappetizing term for offal, I don't know. But again, up to the point in America, you'd never see any of that sort of stuff apart from, in sort of specialist cuisines, perhaps in, the deep south in which were born of, have a sort of poor history and you use the cheap bits. But again, it's like, if people want to eat chicken breast and sirloin steak, and it's that's what you want. They don't care, oh, we want a steak. And you go to, I don't know, the steakhouse, Aberdeen Steakhouse, and they bang on about 100% Aberdeen Angus. But I don't really think that you're getting very good steak there. I mean, allegedly, I haven't been there for many years.
No, I don't know. But yeah,
legal trouble. But yeah, it's going back to, it's going back to what we've all been saying, is that it's not wasting anything. It's eating every single bit. But it's going back to that same old argument about, why does someone pay 22 quid for a chicken and get one for 3 quid? Well, hang about. A chicken, you're getting 3 meals from it anyway. So, from 2 to 4 people, you can roast it first. You've got sandwiches, you've got stock, that in itself. So it's, again, we go right back to the basics of this. I really still believe that children should be taught cooking, not home economics, cooking in schools. Yeah. And all the people, whether it's the Prulis or the Jamies, these are really, and people say, cooking, absolutely rubbish, just to know how to make a salad dressing, to boil an egg. I mean, this basic, to be able to roast a chicken, this sort of stuff. Once you have the basics of cooking, then you're completely free from the tyranny of having to, buy ready meals and all the rest of it. And they say, well, ready meals are convenient. We don't have much time. How long does it take? I'm thinking of
make an omelette or something.
Make an omelette, exactly, or
2 minutes,
or whatever it is. Yeah. And again, people will say, oh no, it's a shag. And that's why there's a supermarket ready meal is worth billions and billions of pounds in the industry, because it's just profiting on people. So I don't have enough time. But a lot of time people are a bit scared, and they're friends of mine who certainly have the time. Oh, we don't cook. No. It's much easier to just get it from the supermarket. And you think, again, you don't want to be finger waggy. Each their own, but you should have the basic.
No, I think you can do some finger wagging there. I'm with you on that one. I was luckily just about old enough to be of the generation where I did do O-level home economics, and and we were taught to cook at school. We did all the breads, the pastries, offal, everything. We did choux, flaky. I learned how to do all the classic patisserie stuff, everything for an O-level, and that was not optional. That was forced upon me, and I'm so grateful that it happened. But I also think that the big difference is when you're cooking from scratch and you're selecting ingredients, you buy, if you knew what the ingredients that went into those ready meals, you would never buy them off a supermarket shelf. And that's sort of a big difference.
Emulsifiers and, because if something's going to be kept, you need the whole, I mean, Felicity Lawrence, Joanna Blythman, they're very good on these sort of topics of what goes into your ready meal. And, it's not just, when we talk about salt, it's not just your pinch of nice Malden. There's huge salt levels in those ready meals, hidden salts, hidden sugars. Yeah. And they're just, it's, I mean, for example, beans or, a tin of beans. And it's again back to not being snobby about tin food, for example. I think Jack Munro's brilliant. She's just, I find her absolutely brilliant. She's lovely, but she's inspirational about if you haven't got any cash at all, you can still cook and eat healthily and feed your children on, far less than what the ready meals would be. And I just feel that it goes back so much more, even more to Britain as a culture and British food culture, in that for too long, food has been seen as fuel, and you look back, I mean, you can trace it back, the sort of fall of British food, right back to the Enclosures Act. Then you move all the way through
what was that, Tom? What enclosure?
It was the Enclosures back. This is right back where common land, where people were allowed to graze their sheep and pigs and everything else.
Right.
They were enclosed and it became private land. This is, I think, in the 15th century, So
okay, we're going back a bit.
Way back. But then you move towards basically women starting to work, so therefore, quite rightly, and leaving, leaving the kitchen, and so the tradition of home cooking started to disappear. Rationing, of course, that went on for many years after the war, quite a long time after the war. And then you move to the white heat of technology and processed foods, and somehow we just lost our connection with the land to a point, I think. And even chucking in the Victorians, where pleasure was seen as, you couldn't be sybaritic. Food, to enjoy food was seen as something not quite British and not quite right. It's what those strange people on the continent.
Vulgar, yes.
Yeah, vulgar, and the joy of food, and to show joy in food and excitement. And even 30 years ago, I would have thought, I mean, we've come on a lot, but there's no food revolution yet, I still believe, because food revolution means good food for everyone. And that most certainly has not happened at all. It's still, not just a middle class Waitrose thing, but it should be, people always go back and say, well, look at France. They understand that a good chicken will give you 3 meals. Well, if you look at France at the moment, the rise of fast food and processed foods is moving faster than it's happening here. We reached rock bottom and we're sort of beginning. There is hope. There is perhaps light. But the great food cultures, France and Italy, they're worrying about losing their culinary heritage. As children don't cook, as children get, see McDonald's is far more exciting than an 8-hour cooked ragu. It's sort of slightly switched around that, Britain used to be the butt of every culinary joke in the world, and still is. China have millions of YouTube channels laughing about British food. I mean, it's the Beatles and Harry Potter and shite food. And it
has come on massively since like the 70s. 70s and 80s, which was kind of my youth. It's come on hugely since then. But yeah, it's interesting. You're saying you feel like we're at the bottom. I feel like we've gone part way up, but maybe I am in that sort of London Waitrose kind of, slightly kind of woolly mollycoddled kind of viewpoint. And what was super interesting that you said there is change only really happens when it's happening to the masses. When the most basic levels of food are improving, that's a marker of real change, not the fact that I can walk into the West End and get an organic Buddha bowl or something. That's where it's really happening. And it has to come from cooking, and when you're cooking you understand ingredients. So yeah, I think maybe the missing link in all this is cooking, is people not cooking.
And it goes back to that, and talk about how do we change perceptions, and how I think that Jamie Oliver has done a huge amount. People give him crap all the time.
No, it's incredible.
He really has. He says, look, don't be scared of cooking. And I think. So many people sit watching cookery programs with a ready meal on their knee. It's back to sort of food onanism, food porn. They're quite going, oh, isn't that nice? Watching, I don't know, Rick Stein or whoever it is. And there's an irony in that, I think, as well. But I just, what I love about London in particular is what makes the city great for me is immigration. This is one of the most thrilling cities in the world because you have all these different cultures side by side. You go to New Malden for Korean, or you go to Wembley for sort of, Sri Lankan or Gujarati. And that is having my children growing up in that sort of, in the city makes me very happy indeed, because it's entirely normal for them to go into all sorts of different restaurants and see different cultures. And of course, for me, food is a window into culture, and you learn to love and respect other cultures through food sometimes. But then you go to, it's not just, in the country as well. I mean, I grew up in the country and there are some incredible butchers around there where my mum lives. We grew up in Wiltshire, but there were always butchers there. So it wasn't just this sort of middle-class Waitrose thing. I think there is, people who live, who've grown up with good butchers will continue to use good butchers. And it's not a class thing. And I think, lots of butchers, I suppose. I mean, I don't know about the figures about butchers. Are they closing or are they, it's.
When you're talking like a bricks and mortar butcher, I'm not sure either, because we're purely online. So we're just a digital business. But we do get the odd comment from customers saying, oh, I'm coming to you because my local butcher is closed, or, and I do think people are shopping more at the supermarkets, and it's a pity, I'd like to see people shopping from buying their meat from a butcher's, going to the greengrocers next door and going to the bakery after that. And that's your week shop done, that's all you need. But of course, the supermarkets out of town, people are driving their cars to them now, and it's a whole different pattern of consumption. Or more often than not, it's done on Ocado and it just gets delivered to your door. And it's there's a disconnect, even a bigger disconnect when you're just ordering online, particularly because a lot of people when they order online will have last week's basket saved. And they're just going, we'll have that. So they're not eating variety anymore, which is a huge pity.
And I was guilty as that again, with the Ocados occasionally, but because I love food and I love going food. It's something, I wake up thinking, right, what do I have for lunch? What do I have for dinner? And because I'm freelance and work at home, I'd be like, oh, I'll just go to HC Water and see, or, you know, depending on where I'm going in London or around the country, I'll always think, oh, that shop's there or that shop's there. I mean, I think another great butcher that people sort of, you know, again, slightly sneer at, but it's oh God, what's it called? A provenance. I think, you know, I yes, of course, they're in Notting Hill and they're in, you know, in Maida Vale and, you know, posh places. But that, you know, I just love going to the butcher and hearing, you know, I'm always asking questions, but hearing someone say, what do I do with that? Right. Well, that's shin of beef. And, you know, do it over 4 hours and you put it with a bit of liquid and you cook it. Oh, right. And moving people away from the fillet steak and the summer steak. Not that there's anything, you know, again, if you like fillet steak, you like fillet steak. It is what it is. But there's only one small bit of fillet under the back.
On each animal, and you've got another 300 kilos to get rid of. It's funny, as I'm a relatively recent meat eater. I was a 25-year vegetarian.
Oh, really? That's fascinating.
I did a degree in food science, and the first year of my degree in 1989 was the BSE crisis, and that put me off. I did food science nutrition, but it was basically, my degree was in industry based. So I was learning how to make hyper palatable foods. You know, we're learning how to make Pringles and Twiglets and things like that, and how to balance the salt and the sugar and everything so that you can't stop eating them. Yeah. And then the BSE crisis broke, and 180 people died, and hundreds of thousands of cows were killed because of it. And that put me off eating meat. And then I got to sort of mid-40s and thought, am I as well as I should be? No, probably not. And I started to try and eat a more kind of paleo style diet and cut out the processed vegetarian foods, and my health improved. So when I first started eating meat, I didn't really know what any of it was. And this was like 6 years ago. So I didn't know what the cuts were. I didn't know what they were called. And I used to shop at Provenance, and what you just said really resonated with me. My nearest one, there was one in West Hampstead and one in Queen's Park now.
Yeah, Queen's Park. That's what I'm
but I mean, much as I don't want to big up the competition too much, they are incredible and their produce is great. But I used to do that. I'd go, I don't know what a lot of this stuff is. What do I do with it? And got a lot of kind of help and guidance, but also from Queen's Park Farmers Market, which is my local farmers market. Yeah. I wish more people could shop at farmers markets and have that experience.
And again, people do, the problem is, again, in Britain, we do have this thing that they see, oh, wow, why, you know, you're paying £2 for a potato covered in mud, you know, farmers markets are overpriced because we lost our culture of markets, you know. Yeah. I live in sort of, I used to live in Shepherd's Bush, and I live not very far from there now. I'm sort of Olympia now, but the Shepherd's Bush Market is the one, you know, down
underneath the railway arches. Yeah.
Oh, it's brilliant. I just, you know, that you can go to, you get the best mutton at, you know, at the halal butchers. Now, it's Provenance is slightly different when you go to halal butchers, and perhaps I wouldn't be buying, you know, chicken from there. I don't know, but and also it's more difficult to intensively farm sheep, so you can do it. But
it's just safer bet, isn't it? It's a safer bet.
It is. Yeah. And you go there. I just love going past, you know, here's the Indian shop, the Caribbean shop, you know, and you can just go and pick up bits, and it's just, you know, disappear into different worlds and different cultures, and it's really interesting. And that is a proper market. It's selling nylon knickers, it's selling saris, it's selling dog bones, it's selling fish.
But it's a pleasure being involved and choosing your ingredients and thinking about what you're going to do with them. And this is something that I think a lot of people miss when they hit the Ocado button, is that they're missing that surprise element. You know, every time I go to the farmers market, I come back with things I didn't intend to buy in a good way.
and it's back to that thing. I just wrote a thing for Country Life. I mean, about seasons, we all know the seasons, but it is the joy, you know, at the moment of, I mean, it's all right. We're still in brassica time at the moment. We've got all our nice sort of, but there's a sort of hunger gap. Yeah, sort of March, April, traditionally, you know, when the winter stuff was over, but the spring stuff hadn't quite, you know, come to fruition yet. And of course, now we live in a world where we can eat strawberries in December and tomatoes in December. And that I still, you know, I still balk if I see, asparagus being sold in winter. But yet I'm a hypocrite because I'm quite happy to eat, you know, a strawberry or something like that. Actually, I try not to eat strawberries, but unless, you know, I like the reason for local and seasonal, as you know, is they taste so much nicer when they've just been picked up, I don't know, in the Wye Valley or down in Cornwall and Wales. You know, that's why seasonal food is so lovely, because you're eating at its very best. And once it goes, you think, oh, that's sad. But then it tastes better when it comes around again.
There's something else. But I think there's a fundamental deeper connection there without sort of going too hippie about it. But when you're eating seasonally and locally, you're connected to the environment your food is grown in. And there is a transfer of information from the soil to our gut, to our, to our general well-being that's lost when you're buying green beans from Kenya, or where a huge amount of our fruit and veg come from Almeria in Spain, which is polytunnels and hydroponics. And there's no interaction with the land. There's not that connection of soil biology affecting the nutrients in the food that you get from, like I think I told you, I just spoke to Helen Browning before, but the loop that we have, that we are a part of nature and we're part of that natural cycle of the transfer of nutrients and the information that we're getting from our food. And sort of going even deeper than that, nature provides what we need for the seasons. So the things that are in season in the summer will cool our bodies. The things that are in season in the winter will help us generate heat. It goes a bit more. I honestly believe that eating seasonally will improve people's health.
And I couldn't agree more. Also, there's that thing of, well, eating the meat. People will say, "Wow, it's a cow's a cow," but the difference between, I don't know, talking about Laurel's farm up in Scotland, or when so much care. I mean, she's planting different clovers, because she feels that it adds variety to the feed and it makes them more healthy. And this is entirely scientifically proven. I remember Jody Schechter, who had Laverstock. I mean, he's still doing it, but I think, it was biodynamic. Again, biodynamic, people say, well, that's a bit hippy-dippy. Well, the moon is very important to farming, just as much, in a different way as the sun is. So it's not quite as bonkers as it sounds. It's incredibly hard work and all the rest of it. But he has something like 30, 40, 50 different kinds of clovers and sort of, different plants to really, the biodiversity. And I mean, for example, I think about my mum's house down in the country. It's in Wiltshire. When she moved in 25 years ago, the fields and the garden was used with path clear and and she stopped that 25 years ago. And I've seen it happen. The regeneration of the bugs come back, which means the birds come back, which it is.
And it's level after level after level.
Oh, and it's just, you have, it throbs with health. And now it's much easier to do that on a couple of fields, in a house, but it's just, I just love seeing it. The mayflies and just it throbs with life, and grass snakes and frogs and well, crayfish, but they're invaders anyway. But do you know what I mean? It was just, you see what happens, and it's the same as talking to farmers who've converted, and not necessarily saying we're going to, but they just stopped the cycle of the pesticides and the fertilizers. And as you say, it is a lot harder work to pull out the weeds by hand and do it all by hand. But there's just no argument. There's no argument that you look at it, it just, as I said, it throbs with vitality.
But
and
life will support other life, won't it? I mean, even if we're doing this in a cropping system, I'm sure you're aware of the guys Wildfarmed who make this incredible grains in rows in pasture, and their land is improving its fertility while providing food for us. And it just needs a bit of a fundamental reshift of how we think about cropping and agriculture. And I think what those guys are doing is utterly extraordinary. It's pasture with these rows of wheat in it, and the machinery that is particularly spaced to be able to harvest it, while the pasture is providing improved nutrients to the soil. And there's so much misinformation about how we put nutrients back in the soil. I think particularly because we have an awful lot of vegans and plant-based people coming to our pages to kind of debate the good ones, troll the bad ones, but claiming that animals are total land destructors. And I recently interviewed some guys from an organization called Soil for Climate. And they're a charity in America. They're opening a branch here, who are basically saying that the only way, or the fastest way we can get this trashed arable land and turn it back into something that can help climate change is by grazing it. And actually they've shown that you can create 3 centimeters of topsoil per year.
Wow.
With grazing animals, back into the systems. But it's all about bringing more animals onto the land, improving the biodiversity, and then finding ways just to take out the bits that we need from the system. I think that's super important. And
it is. And I find with the whole rewilding debate that in principle, I like parts of it. I like the idea of, but I do think that people tend to forget that if we let nature take over, it would just be one big, the land for many hundreds of years has been managed by humans.
Yeah.
And to leave it, it wouldn't just all go lovely. It would turn into thicket and scrub and, the whole rewilding. And while I love the idea of turning conventionally farmed and intensity farmland back into, naturally and regenerative farmland, I'm not fully on board with 100% rewilding and bringing it all back, because we need, we need to grow our own food.
There's a big, I have a big problem with rewilding when it's described as just that, we'll leave it alone entirely. Because if you've taken, let's say an arable field in the UK, that is very, very out of balance from the natural systems that we would have. So if you just go and leave that, it could take hundreds of years for that system to rebalance. It's got to go through an awful lot of changes. And also, unless you put animals on it, it's not going to change. Because, and some of our producers we've been talking to who produce pork, for example, they've been running pigs through ancient forests that have had no animals in. It's been fenced off. And therefore, all the native trees are dying because they're being overtaken by brambles and nettles and things like that. You put 100 pigs in and you run them through 250-acre forest. They eat the brambles, they eat the nettles, they rip up all the invasive species, they eat the roots of the things that shouldn't be there, they fertilize the land and they move on. And then suddenly the oak trees have a huge increased growth, because that's nature, that's a natural system. And then you can put the chickens in if you can find them again, and you can you can have these systems. But I'm of the belief that the only way we're going to actually restore these landscapes is by managing the animals within them to accelerate the change.
And it goes back to regenerative, is that the only justification we can give for eating meat is, I feel, that we have to, I think that Philip Limbury and, Compassion and Wildfarming is a really fantastic thing. He's fighting, his organization is fighting against factory farming. Now, factory farming is even at its best, which there isn't much of it, it's incredibly cruel and unnatural. The waste that comes off it, the ammonia, the stink, the squalor that the chickens, often are living in. And I saw you had Tracy Worcester that you've been talking to. And she's a sort of, passionate campaigner against factory farming. And, the supermarkets and the big agricultures, big agri companies basically would like to have one massive abattoir. We've seen this with the supermarkets, who, going back to another hugely important point, is that we're losing abattoirs, small local abattoirs. Local abattoirs are at the very heart of sustainable farming, because if you're taking your livestock, whatever it is, hundreds of miles, through and stress and strain and all the, anxiety, all the rest of it, you need small local abattoirs. And they say, well, they were closed down because of EU, because it's too expensive, because you need a vet there, this. And
big problem for us.
Yeah,
big problem for us.
It's and this is where I talk to a lot of farmers. They say, well, our local abattoir that was so good, and some of them, because some of them won't do goats, or some of them won't do, if the cows are the wrong shape,
or the horns. You can't. They won't do them with the cows with horns,
and that this again, there's a brilliant campaign for, I can't remember what it's called, it's called like Save Our Abattoirs, but people don't want to talk about abattoirs, it's all blood and killing. But a properly run abattoir means it minimizes stress, it minimizes cruelty, it is all about the welfare of the animal. Obviously the animal's being killed, that's why we, that's and sort of a truth that you can't really get away from you're doing. But I just really feel that if we lose sight of local abattoirs, then we're in real trouble as well. And the supermarkets, one thing they do want to do is they want to make it ultra efficient, ultra profitable.
Because the logistics become cheaper.
Exactly.
I've often been quite transparent about this as the person that does most of the writing for for the business, that the part of the entire process that we have the least amount of control over is the abattoirs, because there are so few of them. And also, for us, we're doing whole carcass butchery, and we're buying entire cows at a time. We're not buying cuts. And I'm very concerned, again, about the carbon impact of taking one cow to one kill to then transport to us. Suddenly, if the cow was farmed in a way that could be considered carbon neutral, carbon negative, and we've put it in a chilled van, and so there is an awkward economy of scale with the supermarket model of taking 20 cows to a bigger abattoir and having them brought in a bigger truck to us. There's so many difficult questions. you know, one of the abattoirs a few of our farmers work with is called Pickstock, and it was designed by Temple Grandin, and it was
with the sort of rounded walls,
so they can't see any other animals happening. They walk into a kill room with no other animals there, and they're allowed to relax, and they're sort of monitored to keep calm. And the bolt comes from above and behind, so they don't see anything, and it's instant lights out. And she was this incredible woman in America.
She was. I don't want to get this wrong. I think wasn't she? She had some form of autism.
She was autistic. Yeah. She was autistic, but it gave her particular form of autism gave her a real insight into
with animals,
social behavior and psychology. But this place is incredible. It's carbon neutral. It generates electricity from its own waste products. They collect all the methane from fermentation. It's very, very efficient. The problem is that because it's a big unit in one place, is the transport elements and all that. It's such a difficult thing to get right. And I don't know if you know, but the PFLA, who we buy a lot of produce from, are working on a mobile abattoir.
Oh no, I've heard about this. Now this is a very pragmatic and forward-thinking. This could be the future, couldn't it? You're bringing the abattoirs to the farm.
Absolutely, and if that thing can run on biodiesel or, you know, powered by electricity or whatever, you come to the farm. And I've spoken to vets who have had to, you know, kill animals in the field because they've broken a leg down a rabbit hole or something like that. And they said to me that you can bolt gun a cow or a sheep standing next to other cows and sheep, and it falls over, and the others don't even raise a head. There is no sense of fear. There is no sense of that guy's just been killed. It's not the same type of psychology. That has to be the most ethical way of killing an animal for human consumption, is to actually visit the field. I believe that they're working on there's some EU regulation that prevents that from being the case. I think you can kill on the farm if it's for your own use, but not for commercial.
That's it. It's the issue, isn't it? Of it has to be certified and all that. But I just feel that all this noise they've made now these people have taken us out of Europe and all this balls up that it is. At least that one thing, if there's one thing that's good out of it, I can't think of anything that's good at the moment, but if there is something, you know, because the EU regulations are pretty good actually, you know, on a lot of farming. But if that was European, why can't the government and, you know, George, what do they call him, useless in private eye, but George Eustace, you know, it seems that my other problem is we're going back really, but going back to government, is that people view, you know, getting, you know, being in charge of agriculture, DEFRA, whatever it is, they just see it as a stepping stone. They're always changing, you know, so there's no time to really get stuck in. I mean, I think Minette Batters, who is the NFU chairman at the moment, is fantastic. She's really good at understanding. Yes, the NFU does have a lot of intensive farming, but she also understands that the future is regenerative. She's a beef farmer herself. She's great. And I really feel that, you know, things like that, those small changes, like, you know, the NFU, not just saying, well, you know, it's not sustainable doing it, you know, sustainable economically doing it, and it's hard work and people have to make money and blah, 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 blah. But I like the fact that it seems like I said, there is hope. There is, you know, as people begin to see, as people are becoming more and more aware of the environment, of global warming, that through the catastrophe that is happening, there is hope that, you know, we have got time to change things, to change for the good of the planet, the good of our health, the good of animals, the good of everything. And that's what, you know, because food isn't flower arranging. It's not a hobby food. Food is a prism through which you see everything. It's health and happiness. It is. It's a necessity. And you eat well, and you look at, you know, for everything from studies of children, you know, not having breakfast to prisoners being fed, you know, the idea of the hospital food, you know, it just seems crazy. And a million people have tried to change it. You just come from a heart operation. You have some horrible deep fried processed muck. This is where food is, you know, the good food is so important. It's not a class thing. It's not a money. It's about everything, you know. Good food, you eat well, you know, show me what you are, and I'll tell you, you know, tell me what you eat, whatever. I'm thinking Brillet Savin. Tell me what you eat and I'll show you are, whatever it is, you know, or you are what you eat, as it's been changed. But it's not just, and I think the government has to start seeing like that, you know, it's not just celebrity chefs on telly cooking, how much we might like or dislike that. It is, you know, good food is a right. It's a universal right.
And it's a responsibility of us as parents to fill that missing generation gap. and actually teach our kids to cook and teach our kids what ingredients are. And I think there's a generation that slightly missed it. And I think they're probably called millennials now.
Yeah.
But the ones who are, I think I certainly was taught to cook. I was taught to cook at school. I was taught to cook by my parents, even though they were terrible cooks. And I want to now close that generation gap and teach my kids to cook. But we've been yabbering on for quite a while. I'm going to ask you to put rose-tinted spectacles on and tell us what the future holds.
Well, my rose-tinted spectacles firmly on. I am an optimist, but by nature, and the fact whether it's you or all the other butchers, and I'm not talking about butchers, I'm talking about all sorts of food production. I feel that it's now become a mainstream narrative. It's no longer out in the margins. It's no longer, you know, the hippies and the biodynamic bearing their horns with you know, it has become mainstream, and it's become of huge importance now as we face this environmental catastrophe, which is happening as we speak. It is all the more important now to look at where our food comes from, to eat healthily. You think of all the, you know, the how unhealthy processed food really is. Now it's fine. My daughter, I love a Big Mac. My children love the occasional Big Mac, but it's about, you know, eating. You know, you know, it's eating for the future. It's, you know, thinking about not just where our food comes from, but it's, you know, to eat well is to live well. And I do feel that people, you know, the more children that learn to cook, the more people who care about where their food comes from, the more people who care about sustainable farming and realize the ravages of intensive farming. This is our only hope. I really feel that regenerative farming really is our hope for the future. And I am a bit optimistic. I feel that, you know, it's the moment it shakes off, you know, we've got to get this mindset that you know, expensive meat and butchers, you know, oh, it's only for that, or no, it's, you know, good meat is for everyone. And I have hope. And the more you guys and every other butcher start just talking, you know, dialogue, letting people know about it, that there is hope. And we just have to realize that food is possibly the most important thing of our life. You can be celibate, you can avoid taxes, or the rest of it. You have to eat. You might not like food, but you have to eat. So may as well eat well and eat sustainably. And, you know, just, well, we forget enjoy. Good meat tastes really nice. It gives me pleasure. That's when it comes down to the base, but it gives me even more pleasure knowing that it's been sustainably farmed in a humane, compassionate, and a way that looks after the earth and looks to the future. So there is hope.